The valley was a furnace, its jagged ridges shimmering beneath the weight of the midday sun. Heat rippled above the sand like an invisible curtain, blurring edges, distorting shapes, turning the horizon into a mirage. For most, it was a hostel. Emptiness, a place where a man's body could wither in hours. But for him, the sniper hidden among the rocks, the valley was alive. Every grain of sand, every shift of shadow, every whisper of wind was a signal. He had been lying prone for nearly 6 hours. His rifle was braced against a smooth slab of rock, the bipod pressed into the sand. His body was stiff, locked in the discipline of stillness, but his eyes remained sharp, unblinking as they swept the valley through the scope. To anyone else, the silence would have been maddening. To him, silence was language. It told him where to look, when to breathe, when to wait. His name was whispered in camp, but the enemy didn't know it. To them, he was simply the ghost. They spoke of him with a mixture of fear and anger, as if he were some phantom stitched into the desert itself. Fighters had gone out on patrol and never returned. Commanders had lost men without ever seeing where the bullet came from. Stories circulated that he could see at night, that he fired without aiming, that he never missed. None of it was true, not exactly. What was true was far simpler. He was patient, disciplined, and precise. Patience was his weapon as much as the rifle he cradled. The sniper shifted slightly, feeling the grit of sand grind against his cheek. Sweat dripped down his temple, tickling his skin, but he ignored it. Movement meant exposure, and exposure meant death. He had learned long ago that the smallest twitch could betray a position. Instead, he let discomfort become part of him, something to be endured, something as natural as breathing. Through the scope, the world narrowed to a circle of clarity. He scanned the ridges opposite, the scrub brush dotting the valley floor, the scattered ruins of an old mud brick outpost that had collapsed decades ago. Nothing moved. Nothing ever did until it mattered. Yet he waited, because that was what hunters did. Far behind him, his unit lay hidden in the rocky hills, relying on him to watch the valley's approaches. He was their shield in the distance, the unseen eye that warned of danger before it arrived. If he did his job, they would live. If he failed, they would never see death coming. It was a burden he carried without complaint. He wasn't here for glory or medals. He was here because someone had to be. The sniper had long ago stopped thinking of himself as a man in a uniform. Out here, alone and silent, he felt more like part of the terrain, just another rock, another shadow, another patch of silence. The wind shifted. A faint breeze carried the scent of dust and something else, wood smoke, faint, distant, almost imperceptible. His eyes narrowed. There was no reason for fire in this part of the valley. Not naturally. Smoke meant people. Slowly, carefully, he adjusted the scope, scanning along the ridge lines. Minutes passed. Then he caught it, barely a flicker. A glint of sunlight reflecting off metal. It vanished just as quickly, but it was enough. He had seen it. He adjusted. His breathing slowing his heart. The enemy was here. He didn't know how many, or where exactly, but he knew enough to understand that patience would soon turn to action. The sniper's mind drifted back to his training, to the lessons drilled into him when he was just a recruit. Let them reveal themselves. Do not chase the target. Let the target come to you. A sniper's greatest weapon is time. He repeated those words in his head, a mantra that steadied his pulse. His spotter was not with him today. This was a solo mission. Some would call that reckless. He thought of it as necessary. Too many men in one place meant too many ways to be seen. Alone, he could vanish. Alone, he could be the ghost they feared. The hours dragged on, the sun sinking lower, stretching. Shadows across the valley. His muscles ached from stillness, but he didn't move. He had long ago learned to treat discomfort as a companion. Pain was irrelevant. Only focus mattered. And then movement. It was subtle at first. A rock tumbling down a slope, disturbed by something unseen. Then the faint outline of a figure slipping between brush. His scope tracked it, following the slight shift of fabric against sand. Not one, but three. Maybe more. They were moving cautiously, testing the terrain, unaware that every step they took drew them deeper into his sightline. The sniper did not fire. Not yet. He studied their formation, their pacing, the way they carried themselves. This wasn't a routine patrol. They were too careful, too deliberate. Their rifles weren't slung casually, but held tight, ready. He noted the way their eyes scanned the hills. They weren't searching for just anything, they were searching for him. An ambush. The realization settled like stone in his chest, but he didn't panic. If they were here for him, it meant his reputation had struck hard enough to provoke action. Good. Fear was a weapon too, and he had wielded it well. Still, this was different. He had faced patrols, squads, scattered fighters. But this smelled of strategy. They were laying a trap, confident they could root him out. Through the scope, he counted 4 more figures emerging along a ridge. Their positioning told him everything. They thought they had him boxed in. Decoys below, hidden rifles above. A kill box. The sniper's lips curled into the faintest smile. They believed they were hunters. They didn't realize they were already inside his cage. He adjusted his rifle, aligning the reticle over one of the men on the ridge. He studied him not as a person, but as a point of failure in the enemy's design. He noted the nervous twitch of his fingers, the slight lean forward, the tension in his shoulders. Fear already gnawed at them. Fear made men sloppy. The sniper's finger brushed the trigger, but he didn't pull. Not yet. He breathed in deeply, exhaled slowly, letting the moment stretch thin. Timing was everything. The first shot would not just kill a man. It would detonate the trap, unravel their plan, and turn hunters into prey. For now, he waited. The valley held its breath with him. The wind stilled, the shadows lengthened, and the silence grew heavy, pressing down like a storm about to break. He was patience carved into flesh, waiting for the first mistake, the first movement, the first sign that the game had begun. And when it did, he would remind them all why men feared the ghost. The desert night was alive with whispers. Inside a cave carved deep into the mountainside, the enemy fighters huddled close around a dim lantern. Shadows flickered across their faces, stretched long across the rough stone walls. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed clothes, dust, and frustration. No one laughed, no one relaxed. They were men haunted by something unseen, something they could not chase down or kill a ghost. The commander sat cross-legged near the lantern, his rifle propped beside him. His face was weathered, carved with lines of war, but his eyes burned with humiliation. He had lost too many men, not in battle, not in glorious firefights, but two. A single silent gunshot that came without warning. "He is not a spirit," the commander growled, his voice gravelly and sharp. "He is a man, flesh and blood, and flesh and blood can be killed." No one spoke. Some of the younger fighters avoided his gaze, their eyes fixed on the dirt. Others clenched their fists, anger bubbling beneath fear. They wanted to believe him, wanted to think the sniper was only a man. But deep inside, doubt gnawed at them. They had buried too many brothers to believe otherwise. One of the older fighters finally broke the silence. His voice trembled despite the anger in his words. "We never see him. Never. Just a shot, and a man falls. No warning, no sound except the crack. And then nothing. He watches us. Always watching." The commander slammed his fist into the ground. The lantern flickered at the impact, shadows dancing wildly. Enough! He is no demon. He breathes, he eats, he sleeps, and he bleeds. Remember that. But even as he spoke, the commander knew. Fear was spreading like rot through his ranks. Fear was worse than any bullet. Fear made men hesitate, and hesitation meant death. The sniper had become more than a soldier. He had become a story, and stories had power. In villages miles away, elders whispered of the ghost sniper who punished intruders. Fighters fresh from training heard tales before they ever reached the front lines. Mothers told their sons to beware the man with one eye like glass. Whether true or not, it didn't matter. The legend had grown larger than the man himself, and legends had to be destroyed. The commander leaned forward, his voice lower now, controlled, like a blade drawn carefully from its sheath. We will end this. No more games. No more fear. Tomorrow, he dies. The fighters shifted uneasily. One asked cautiously, "How, Commander?" "We do not even know where he hides." A grim smile touched the older man's lips. "That is why we will not search for him. We will make him come to us." He spread a rough map across the dirt floor. Lines and markings scrawled in charcoal traced ridges, gullies, and the valley floor. His finger jabbed at a choke point where the cliffs narrowed into a pass. "Here," he said. "He watches this place. Always. Our men have been killed here again and again. That means he favors it. That means he will return." The fighters leaned closer, listening, hope mingling with fear. "We will send a patrol, no, a decoy. They will move openly, make noise, draw his eye. He cannot resist. He will aim. And while he watches them, the rest of us will already be waiting. Rifles on every ridge, hidden among the rocks. We will see his shot. We will know his position. And when he fires, we will drown him in bullets. Even ghosts cannot fight numbers." Murmurs rippled through the cave. Some nodded eagerly, desperate to believe in a plan. Others remained silent, their silence louder than words. The commander's eyes hardened. He knew what they were thinking. Too many had died already, cut down without ever firing back. The sniper's reputation had grown too heavy, his shadow too long. But if this plan failed, if the ghost escaped again, fear would become permanent. Men would refuse to fight. Their will would collapse. The sniper wasn't just killing bodies. He was killing morale. That night, sleep did not come easily to the fighters. They lay awake on thin mats, staring into the darkness, each man imagining the cold eye of a scope staring back at him. Some dreamed of a shot cracking through silence. Waking in sweat, their hands clutching empty air. Others whispered prayers. By dawn, the plan was in motion. The decoy patrol moved first, 5 men walking in loose formation along the valley floor. They tried to look casual, as though they were merely scouting. But their steps were stiff, their eyes darting nervously toward the cliffs. They knew they were bait, and bait rarely survived. Hidden above them, spread across ridges and rocks, dozens more fighters crouched with rifles ready. Their faces were painted with dust, their rifles angled toward the horizon. They lay silent, waiting, their fingers trembling on triggers. They had prepared themselves for this moment, telling themselves over and over that he was only a man. Only a man. But as the sun rose higher, as the silence deepened, as sweat pooled down their backs, the legend gnawed at them again. Somewhere out there, unseen, a rifle lay watching. Somewhere out there, an eye peered through glass. Somewhere out there, the ghost waited. One of the younger fighters swallowed hard, his mouth dry as sand. What if he sees us first? He whispered. The older fighter beside him didn't answer. He simply gripped his rifle tighter, his knuckles white. Far across the valley, lying hidden among rocks, the sniper already watched. Through his scope, he had seen the decoys enter the valley. He had noted their stiffness, their poor attempt at casual movement. And he had seen, with the precision of a hunter, the unnatural stillness along the ridges, shadows that didn't match the sun. A glint of steel, a head that moved too quickly. He knew. The trap was not for him. The trap was theirs. He adjusted. His rifle, his eye calm, his breathing steady. They had come hunting a ghost, but all they had done was step willingly into his cage. And soon, the valley would echo with the sound of truth, that every legend begins with fear, and fear begins with the man who never misses. The sun rose heavy over the valley, a molten disk casting long, sharp shadows that clung to the ridges like claws. Heat waves shimmered against the rocks, making the land itself appear to breathe. To the untrained eye, the desert looked empty, lifeless. But beneath that illusion, the valley was alive with danger. The decoy patrol moved along the valley floor, their boots crunching softly over sand and gravel. They kept their formation loose, pretending at confidence, but their movements betrayed them. Their eyes flicked too often to the cliffs. Their hands hovered too close to their triggers, and their pace was too measured, too rehearsed. High above, concealed fighters held their positions. Some lay flat against the ridges, rifles resting. On stones, others crouched behind scrub and jagged boulders. They had chosen their spots carefully, waiting for the single crack of a rifle that would reveal the ghost's lair. They believed in numbers, in angles, in preparation. They believed that today they would succeed where so many had failed. But belief was not truth. Farther up the slope, hidden so completely that even the hawks circling overhead would have missed him, the sniper lay prone, his rifle pressed against his shoulder, the bipod anchored firmly into the earth. He had been here long before the trap unfolded, long before the enemy even descended from the mountains. He had chosen this position days ago, studying the land, reading the wind, calculating every path of approach. Now, through his scope, the scene below played out like a poorly staged performance. He studied the patrol first. 5 men, walking in a line meant to look natural, but failing under scrutiny. Their steps lacked rhythm, their spacing too perfect. He could almost taste their fear from this distance. They weren't scouts, they were bait. The sniper shifted his scope, moving along the ridges. That was where the real story lay. The sun betrayed them before they even realized. A faint reflection. A glint of metal rifle barrels poorly covered. A rock out of place too smooth, moved by human hands. The desert had a language of its own, and these men didn't speak it well enough to hide. His lips curled into the faintest smile. They thought they were the hunters, but they had already revealed themselves. He wasn't in their kill box. They were in his. Still, he did not fire. Not yet. The sniper's art was not haste. Patience was the weapon that made bullets inevitable. He let the minutes stretch, watching, recording every detail. He counted them. 8 on the eastern ridge, 5 on the western slope, 3 more near the ruins. Too many to rush, but not too many to break. The desert wind shifted, brushing hot air against his cheek. He tasted dust and grit, but to him, the wind was more than discomfort. It was information. It told him how his bullet would drift, how the air would bend his shot. Slowly, he adjusted the elevation, made minor corrections, movements so subtle they could barely be seen. Every shift was measured, practiced, rehearsed in hundreds of hours on ranges far from this war. Out here, there would be no second chances. One of the decoy patrolmen stumbled slightly, his foot slipping on loose gravel. It was a small thing, a natural misstep. But the reaction from the ridges betrayed the ambush. Several heads turned. Too quickly, rifles shifted, nerves showed. The sniper's eyes hardened. Confirmation. He inhaled deeply, steady and controlled, and let the breath out slowly. His world narrowed further, until the heat, the noise, the distance, all of it fell away. Only the scope remained, and inside it, the small black crosshair rested over a man crouched against the rocks, his cheek pressed against a rifle. The sniper did not see him as a man. Not in this moment. He was a piece of the trap, a gear in, a machine. And machines broke when the right part was removed. His finger brushed the trigger, not pressing yet, only feeling the familiar curve. He could fire now. He could shatter the silence, drop one, maybe two before the others reacted. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. He shifted slightly, marking targets. In his mind, one on the eastern ridge, another on the western slope, a third near the ruins. Each one vulnerable in their hiding spot, each one believing they were unseen. He would take them in sequence, methodical, measured. Below, the patrol reached the choke point, the narrow stretch where cliffs pressed closer together. Their pace slowed, their eyes flicking nervously. They were waiting for the ghost to reveal himself. Waiting for death. The sniper almost pitied them. Almost. Through the glass of his scope, he caught a subtle tremor in one man's hands, the way his rifle shook ever so slightly. Fear. Even trained fighters could not hide it. Fear was always visible if you knew how to look. Another man shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his position against a rock. The movement was careless. In war, carelessness was a signature. The sniper's crosshair lingered on him, steady, silent. The trap was set. The valley was primed. And yet, the men who thought themselves hunters were already prey. He would not rush. No, he would let the moment stretch thinner, let their nerves fray further, let the silence become unbearable. Because silence was his ally, and fear was his. Ammunition long before the bullet left the barrel. And when he finally fired, when the first body dropped and chaos consumed them, they would realize the truth far too late. They had not ambushed the ghost. They had delivered themselves into his hands. The desert wreathed with silence. It was a silence so heavy it seemed alive, pressing against the ears, swallowing even the faintest sound of boots shifting in sand. To most men, such silence was unbearable, a weight that made the mind itch. For movement, for speech, for anything to break the stillness. But for the sniper lying hidden on the ridge, the silence was home. He pressed his cheek gently against the rifle stock, the cool metal a steady anchor against the heat radiating off the rocks. Through his scope, the world shrank into a circle no wider than his palm. Beyond the glass, the desert sprawled vast and endless, but in here, in this narrow frame, everything was sharp, controlled, and intimate. He had long ago stopped seeing through human eyes. The scope was an extension of himself, an extra organ that distilled chaos into clarity. Every shift of shadow, every twitch of muscle, every glint of light, he absorbed it all. The ambush below was unraveling itself to him like a poorly tied knot. On the valley floor, the 5 decoys continued their uneasy march. Their faces were taut, lips pressed thin, eyes darting toward cliffs they pretended not to study. He could read them as easily as open books. The man on the far left was youngest, his gait too hurried, betraying nerves. The tallest, in the middle, was pretending to lead, chin higher than the others, but the stiffness of his shoulders told another story. Bait, the sniper thought. They know it, I know it. The only ones who don't know yet are the fools waiting to spring the trap. He shifted the scope upward, sweeping slowly across the eastern ridge. He found them quickly. A man crouched behind. A jagged rock, his rifle angled down at the valley. Sweat gleamed on his temple, catching sunlight for the briefest instant. The sniper studied him with the detachment of a surgeon. He didn't see a man. He saw a mistake, a shimmer of light. That would cost him his life. He adjusted slightly, moving the scope to the right. Another fighter lay flat, the barrel of his rifle poking just past the cover of stone. To anyone else, it would seem hidden. To the sniper, the barrel was a beacon. The metal reflected faintly against the desert glare. That was the problem with hiding in the open. Nature was perfect, but men rarely were. The sniper's breathing slowed, his heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of his watchful stillness. His training guided him. Inhale, exhale, pause, count, mark your targets. Do not shoot until the world itself gives permission. He shifted the scope again, this time to the western slope. More fighters. 3 crouched in a cluster, too close to one another, breaking one of the oldest rules of survival. They thought numbers meant safety. They didn't realize it meant efficiency. One bullet could send the others scattering, panicked, exposed. The sniper lingered on one of them, studying the micro-expressions of his face even at distance. His jaw clenched, his lips muttered something silently, prayer, perhaps. The sniper almost pitied him. Almost. But pity had no place here. He moved. Again, this time toward the ruins at the far end of the valley. There, among collapsed mud brick walls, 2 figures shifted. Their rifles poked through gaps in the rubble, waiting for a signal that would never come. The sniper counted again in his head. 8 on the east ridge, 5 on the west slope, 2 at the ruins, 5 below. 20 in all. 20 men against 1 rifle. To anyone else, it would have seemed impossible. To him, it was simply mathematics. Not all needed to fall. Only enough to break the others. Fear would do the rest. He marked his sequence silently. East ridge first. The man with the twitching fingers. Then the western slope, the one closest to the brush. Then one of the ruins. 3 bodies in rapid succession would fracture there. Plan. They would lose formation, lose courage, lose the fragile illusion of control. Through his scope, he saw movement again. One of the bait patrolmen stumbled on loose gravel. His foot skidded, sending tiny pebbles tumbling. Instantly, the fighters on the ridges flinched. Some lifted their rifles higher. One even whispered urgently to another. The sniper caught it all. Every nervous twitch, every betraying motion. To him, this wasn't just an ambush. It was a story written in flesh and stone, and he was the reader turning pages. And he was ready to write the ending. He inhaled deeply, his lungs expanding with the hot desert air. Through the scope, the man on the eastern ridge filled the reticle. The sniper studied him carefully. The man's finger tapped nervously against the trigger guard. His eyes blinked too often. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. The sniper's world slowed. The heat, the light, the distance, none of it mattered anymore. Only the target. Only the perfect stillness before motion. He let his breath slide. Out, slow and steady, until his lungs were empty. At the pause between breaths, where the body is calmest, he settled his finger against the trigger. 1 pound of pressure. That was all it took. But he did not fire. Not yet. His discipline was iron. The urge to shoot, to break the silence, burned in his chest, but discipline kept him still. He knew the power of patience. The longer he waited, the greater the fear would grow. And fear, once rooted, did the killing for him. He shifted the scope again, marking his second target. The man on the western slope, crouched too close to the brush. His sniper could almost see the tension in his spine, the anticipation crawling under his skin. He would be next. Third target, one of the ruins. A head bobbing slightly, scanning, restless. Another mistake. Another life waiting to be. Ended. 3 shots. That was all it would take. 3 shots in perfect rhythm. A crack here. Another there. A final one to close the sequence. Chaos would follow, as certain as the sunrise. He breathed again. Deep, calm, steady. Through the scope, the valley unfolded like a theater stage. Actors in their positions, waiting. For the cue. They believed they were the hunters, that they would spring the trap and drown him in bullets. But he was the director, and his cue would be the sound of thunder. The sniper lowered his head slightly, resting more comfortably against the rifle stock. He could feel his heartbeat now, slow, even, not excitement, not fear, just readiness. And as the silence deepened, as the sun climbed higher, as sweat pooled and nerves frayed on the ridges, the sniper smiled faintly to himself. The valley was already his. They just didn't know it yet. The desert held its breath. Every man on the ridges thought he was waiting for the signal. A whispered word, a raised hand, a sudden shot to unleash the ambush. They believed they had control, believed they held the strings of the trap. But in truth, the moment belonged to only one man, the sniper. His cheek rested steady against the rifle stock. His breathing slowed until even the rise and fall of his chest could not disturb his aim. Through the scope, the world narrowed to a circle, and in that circle sat the first man destined to fall the fighter on the eastern ridge. The man shifted. Again, licking dry lips, tapping his finger nervously against the trigger guard. His companions crouched nearby, watching the bait patrol below. They were waiting for courage, waiting for the moment to rise. The sniper gave it to them. He exhaled, slowly. In the stillness at the bottom of his breath, his finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with the sound of thunder. The shot cracked across the valley like lightning splitting stone. Echoes rolled in the air, bouncing between ridges, startling birds from scrub and cliffside nests. And the man. In the scope, he never finished his nervous tap. The bullet struck center, drilling through his temple with a burst of crimson mist. His head snapped sideways, body collapsing like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Silence didn't return. Instead, panic rushed in. On the eastern ridge, men ducked low, their cries sharp with fear. One shouted, "Sniper!" Another dropped flat, scrambling for cover. The bait patrol in the valley froze, wide-eyed, caught between orders and survival. The sniper didn't watch the first man fall. He had already shifted. His scope swung smoothly, settling on the second target, the fighter on the western slope, too close to the brush. The man was still blinking in shock, head jerking toward the sound of the first shot. He never saw the second one. Another crack split the air. The bullet tore through his throat, snapping him backward into the dust. His rifle tumbled from his hands, vanishing into the scrub. His companions gasped, one dragging him by the collar, only to see his eyes already glassy, lifeless. 2 shots, 2 bodies. The valley was no longer an ambush. It was a graveyard waiting to be filled. The sniper's breathing never faltered. He adjusted once more, the scope gliding toward the ruins. Through the broken wall, a head popped up too. Late, the sniper's finger pressed again. The rifle roared. The head vanished in an explosion of stone and blood. The body slumped sideways, pinned half in, half out of the rubble. His partner behind the wall cried out, scrambling deeper into the ruins, cursing, panicked. 3 shots, 3 men down. In less than 15 seconds, the trap had unraveled. The ridges erupted in chaos. Fighters shouted in 3 languages, commands clashing, discipline dissolving. Some ducked lower, pressing themselves against the rocks. Others fired wildly toward the cliffs, bullets cracking against stone nowhere near their target. The bait patrol in the valley broke their formation. 2 men dropped prone, hugging the dirt. Another sprinted for a boulder, abandoning the pretense of calm. Their leader barked at them to hold steady, but his voice wavered. He looked less like a commander now and more like a lamb led to slaughter. The sniper saw it all. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The first 3 shots had already done the work. They had sown fear. He settled again, scope circling back to the eastern ridge. Another fighter exposed half his shoulder while trying to drag his fallen comrade out of sight. A foolish mistake. The sniper squeezed the trigger. The man's shoulder erupted, the bullet shattering bone and muscle. He screamed, collapsing backward onto the corpse he had tried to save. His cries carried across the valley, high and sharp, breaking morale further than any bullet could. The sniper whispered to himself, words swallowed by the desert wind. 4. He moved on. On the western slope, 2 fighters huddled behind a single boulder, too close, sharing fear instead of safety. The sniper lined them both in his scope. 1 bullet, 2 lives. The rifle thundered again. The bullet punched through the first man's skull and into the second's chest. Both dropped instantly, tangled together, eyes open in the dust. The survivors on that ridge broke. They scrambled, scattering away from the rocks, exposing themselves to the very valley they had hoped to dominate. Their rifles clattered against stone as they fled. A sniper tracked them calmly, exhaling, and fired once more. 1 fell, face first, blood staining the sand. Another stumbled, screaming, clutching a leg shredded by the shot. The rest ran harder, blind with terror. The sniper counted again. 7. The ruins were silent now. The man hiding there refused to peek again. Through the cracks in the wall, the sniper caught glimpses of trembling hands gripping a rifle. Fear had pinned him in place more firmly than any bullet. The bait patrol had abandoned all pretense. The youngest of them ran outright, sprinting back toward the far end of the valley. Another tried to follow, but slipped on loose gravel, sprawling in the dirt. The leader cursed, firing his rifle upward into nothing, as though sound alone could push back death. But the sniper's reticle was already on him. The shot split the air. The leader's rifle flew from his hands as his chest caved inward, the bullet tearing through his sternum. He fell backward, arms splayed wide, eyes frozen in disbelief. His men screamed, their courage evaporating. Without a leader, they were only prey. The sniper whispered, 8. The valley no longer belonged to the ambushers. It belonged to the scope, to the man who lay hidden, steady, silent, unseen. Above, the sun bore down mercilessly, its heat drawing shimmering mirages across the sand. But no mirage could disguise what had just happened. In the space of minutes, 20 men had been reduced to half their number. Those still alive no longer thought of victory. They thought only of survival. A sniper adjusted slightly, scanning the field. Survivors hid poorly, their movements betraying them. One crawled on hands and knees, dragging himself toward a crevice. Another clung to a rock, whispering rapid prayers, rocking like a child. 2 more fired bursts blindly toward cliffs that had already gone silent. The sniper smiled faintly. The silence wasn't theirs anymore. It was his. He steadied again, eye in the scope. The first shot had shattered the illusion of power. Every shot after had built something stronger. Terror. And now, terror was the true weapon in the valley. The valley was no longer a battlefield. It had become a cage. The ambushers, once confident, once whispering about the certainty of an easy kill, were now scattered shadows against rock and sand. Every movement was hesitant, every glance skyward filled with dread. The air itself seemed heavier, thick with the weight of unseen eyes. But the sniper saw them all. He lay as still as stone, cheek pressed lightly to the stock of his rifle, the scope sweeping with patience born from years of discipline. The chaos he had unleashed in those first few shots was not meant only to kill, it was meant to fracture, to hollow out their courage. And it had. The survivors were learning a truth no commander ever wanted his men to know. Fear spreads faster than bullets. On the eastern ridge, 3 fighters crouched behind a jagged rock, their breaths loud and uneven. Their eyes darted everywhere, as though expecting the rifle's report at any second. One of them, barely more than a boy, with a thin mustache, muttered under his breath, words spilling in broken prayers. His hands shook so violently that the muzzle of his rifle clattered softly against the stone. Another man shoved him, hissing, "Quiet, he'll hear you." But the boy couldn't stop. The image of the last man, his head split open by a single, impossible shot played again and again behind his eyes. He imagined the crosshairs on his own forehead, imagined the sharp crack that would come before darkness. The third fighter pressed his ear against the rock, as though he could hear the sniper's location through stone itself. His voice was ragged with panic. "He sees us. I know he sees us." None of them dared peek above the ridge. None dared. Test fate. The sniper had taught them well in only a few moments. On the opposite slope, one survivor crawled through the dirt, dragging himself on elbows and knees. His leg was shredded by shrapnel from a ricochet, the wound raw and bloody. Every pull forward left a dark smear across the ground. His teeth, clenched against pain, yet louder than his groans, was the frantic beat of his heart. He did not crawl toward safety. He crawled away from the idea of being seen. His mind screamed that distance was survival, that if he just reached the shadows of the valley's edge, maybe the sniper would lose interest. But the sniper's scope tracked him lazily, the reticle hovering over the crawling figure. The sniper did not fire. Not yet. He let the man drag himself further, closer to hope. Fear was a stronger weapon when allowed to breathe. Near the ruins, the lone fighter who had once shared a wall with his fallen comrade still refused to move. He sat with his back against the cracked stone, rifle clutched across his chest. His eyes were locked on the empty air before him, pupils wide, hands trembling. Sweat soaked his collar and darkened his armpits, but he was too afraid to wipe it. Away, his ears rang with silence. The silence mocked him. Every second he expected it to shatter with another deafening crack. And when it didn't, that silence became worse than the shot. He whispered to himself, voice cracking, "Why doesn't he shoot? Why doesn't he shoot?" The sniper knew. He didn't need to shoot. The man was unraveling all on his own. In the valley's center, what remained of the bait patrol had dissolved completely. 2 of them had fled, scrambling toward the far end, abandoning weapons and comrades alike. Their bodies were now tiny figures in the distance, running without rhythm, stumbling over rocks in their desperation to escape. Another had dropped his rifle entirely, arms stretched upward as though surrender could protect him from a bullet fired hundreds of meters away. He cried out in broken English, "No shoot! No shoot!" But surrender meant nothing to the wind. The sniper could have ended them with a twitch of his finger. But he didn't, not yet. The fleeing, the begging, those things carried further than gunfire. They poisoned the will of the others still alive, whispering in every ear, "You are already defeated." From his perch, the sniper shifted slightly, easing the strain on his elbow. He inhaled, tasting the dry heat, then exhaled with practiced calm. He wasn't rushing. He had no reason to. Fear was finishing the job for him. Through his scope, he watched the group on the eastern ridge again. The boy with shaking hands finally broke. He bolted upright, sprinting blindly down the slope. His comrades screamed at him to stop, to stay low, but terror had deafened him. The sniper tracked him, breathing out slowly. The rifle cracked. The boy crumpled mid-stride, tumbling into the dirt in a lifeless heap. The other two fighters ducked lower, pressing their faces against the rock. They didn't curse the sniper. They cursed their companion for drawing fire, for proving again that there was no escape. The sniper whispered to himself, almost gently, 9. On the western slope, a different kind of fear was spreading. One man, older, scarred across the cheek, snarled at his comrades. "He can't kill us all. We rush him together. Move! Move!" But no one obeyed. Their weapons sagged in their hands. Their eyes darted nervously. They had seen what rushing meant. They had seen what a single bullet could do to two men at once. The scarred man rose halfway, pointing down toward the opposite ridge, still shouting, desperate to rally. "He's only one man! One man!" The sniper's reticle found him easily. Another thunderclap split the air. The scarred man fell mid-sentence, throat torn open, his cry replaced by a wet gurgle. His body rolled down the slope, bumping lifelessly against rocks, until it lay twisted at the bottom. The rest of his men sank into silence. Not one dared move. Fear had consumed the valley completely now. The survivors no longer acted like fighters. They were shadows clinging to stone, waiting for death to choose them. Their rifles once lifted, with purpose, now rested useless in trembling hands. Their eyes scanned constantly, not for the enemy, but for the omen of their own end. And the sniper knew the truth. This was the moment when battles ended, long before the last shot was fired. When courage broke, when heart surrendered, the fight was already over. The valley smelled of dust, of blood, of sun-baked stone. But underneath, it smelled of something stronger. Fear. The sniper remained still, watching, waiting. He let them suffer in silence. Every heartbeat was a drumbeat of terror. Every moment of quiet carried the weight of inevitability. He did not rush, because fear, once lit, spreads like fire. And in this valley, the blaze was unstoppable. The valley was a graveyard now. Not because of the bodies, though. There were enough of those, but because of the silence. It was the kind of silence that smothered the chest, a silence so heavy that even the wind seemed to have stopped breathing. The survivors huddled like broken animals, scattered across stone and shadow. They whispered prayers, cursed the rifle that hunted them, and clutched weapons they no longer trusted themselves to use. But even fear has limits, and desperation, once cornered, has teeth. On the eastern ridge, one of the fighters, a gaunt man with eyes too sharp for his ragged frame, finally broke the pattern. His voice rose in a harsh whisper, a tone laced with fury instead of fear. "We die like goats here, picked one by one." His hand slashed the air. "No more. We rush. All of us. He can't kill everyone at once." The others hissed at him, begging silence, but he pushed harder. "Do you want to wait? Do you want to sit here until he chooses you? Look at them." He jabbed a finger toward the valley floor, where 3 corpses lay twisted in the dust. "That's what waiting does. We move together. We kill him. Or we die trying." It was madness. But madness has a way of sounding like courage when there are no other choices. A murmur spread among the survivors. The broken, scattered fragments of a unit began to stitch themselves back into something resembling purpose. Not strength, not discipline, but defiance. The gaunt man's eyes gleamed. "On my signal." High above, the sniper lay still, his cheekbone pressed lightly against the stock of his rifle. Through the scope, he had seen the change, the way heads lifted, the way shoulders straightened. He knew the signs. They were about to make their final play. He shifted his weight slightly, careful to keep the movement imperceptible from below. His elbows dug deeper into the dirt, his breathing slow, steady. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of his trigger finger. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Not the first shots. Not the second wave. This, the breaking point. The moment when fear boiled into desperate aggression. That was when traps closed. The gaunt fighter raised his arm. For one heartbeat, all was still. The silence was so complete, it seemed the valley itself was holding its breath. Then his arm dropped. The survivors surged. They rose from rocks and shadows, stumbling into a ragged charge. Boots slammed against stone, shouts split the air. Rifles were clutched tight, some firing wildly in half-aimed bursts that echoed through the canyon walls. Dust rose in clouds, kicked up by the frenzy of feet. It was chaos, uncoordinated, but it was movement. And in their minds, movement was survival. The sniper's crosshairs found the gaunt leader first. Crack. The man pitched backward, chest blooming red. His body flipped with the force of the bullet, arms splayed wide as he slammed into the dirt. But the others didn't stop. If anything, his death propelled them forward faster. The sniper shifted, smooth as a machine. His scope cut across the charge, reticle snapping to targets with unshakable calm. Crack. A fighter at the front spun. Sideways, his rifle tumbling from limp fingers. Crack. Another fell forward, sliding through the dust on his knees before collapsing face first. Crack. The man screaming curses vanished mid-shout, jaw disintegrating in a spray of blood. Each shot was deliberate, each one timed to break momentum, to splinter the fragile. Courage that had pulled them together. But still they came. Closer, louder, more frantic. The sniper inhaled, exhaled. His mind was ice, his hands unshaking. They could scream, they could fire, they could run headlong toward him. It didn't matter. The outcome had already been decided. Halfway across the valley floor, the charge faltered. The survivors realized how much ground remained, how many had already fallen. The bodies behind them outnumbered those still standing. But by then it was too late. They were too far from cover, too exposed. The sniper adjusted his scope, settling on the cluster of three running side by side. He squeezed. Crack. The leftmost man crumpled instantly. The center stumbled over him, and the right froze, looking back in horror. Another shot. The one who froze fell next, chest ripped apart. The survivor in the middle tried to rise, tangled in the limbs of the dead, but a final round slammed into his back, pinning him to the earth forever. Above, the sniper adjusted position again, rolling slightly to keep his angle sharp. He felt the rhythm of the fight in his bones. It was no longer combat. It was execution. Through the scope, he found the two men still running. They weren't firing anymore. Their rifles dangled forgotten at their sides. They ran with arms pumping, eyes wide, mouths open, in desperate gasps. For a moment, he considered letting them go. Fear would ride them harder than any bullet could. They would carry the story, spread the legend of the valley that swallowed their brothers whole. But this was no place for mercy. The trap demanded closure. 2 squeezes, 2 echoes. The runners fell. Silence returned. Not the fearful silence of before, but the final silence, the silence of nothing left moving. The sniper lay still, rifle steady, eyes scanning. His breathing was measured, his heart calm. He waited, always waited. Minutes passed. Not a sound. Stirred the valley, but the distant whisper of wind returning at last. It was over. The sniper shifted slowly onto his back, staring up at the vast blue sky. Sweat ran cold down his temple, soaking the cloth beneath his helmet. He let the silence wash over him, not as burden but as confirmation. A trap had sprung. The valley was his. Every shot had found its mark. And now, at last, there were no more marks left to find. The last echo of gunfire had long since faded, swallowed by the vastness of the desert valley. What remained was silence. Not the tense, breathless silence of men waiting to die, but the final silence, the kind that lingers after violence, has spent itself. Dust still hung in the air, stirred by the collapse of bodies, drifting in pale ribbons across the stone floor. The wind had returned now, rushing gently over the rocks, as though nature itself had waited for the guns to quiet before daring to breathe again. From his perch above, the sniper did not move at first. His cheek still rested against the stock of his rifle, the scope fixed on the motionless shapes littering the valley floor. He knew better than to assume it was over. Patience was survival, and survival demanded certainty. So he watched. Minutes stretched like hours. A crow wheeled above the ridge, its cry sharp against the silence. Nothing stirred among the bodies. Below, no trick of shadow, no twitch of hand, no broken stagger of a man pretending to be dead, only stillness. At last, the sniper let out a long, controlled breath. Slowly, with the deliberate care of someone who understood how sound could betray him, he lowered the rifle and rolled onto his back. The sky above was endless, painted in the deep blue of a late afternoon fading toward dusk. He let his eyes rest there, blinking against the brightness. For the first time in hours, his hands trembled, not with fear, but with the release of tension wound too tightly for too long. The battle was done. The valley was his. But victory in war is never clean. He sat up, sliding the rifle across his knees. The silence pressed in around him, no longer a comfort but a weight. Down below, scattered across the valley floor, lay the men who had believed numbers could overcome precision. They had believed wrong. From a distance, they were only shapes, dark stains against pale stone. Up close, he knew, they would be faces, some young, some old, all of them carrying the same final look, the shock of realizing that death had found them faster than their courage could carry them. The sniper's jaw tightened. He had long ago learned not to linger on faces, not to imagine the lives attached to them. Yet sometimes, when the silence pressed too hard, they came back to him anyway, in dreams, in restless hours before dawn. War left no man untouched, not even those who seemed untouchable. He reached for his canteen, took a slow sip of warm water, and let it settle against the dryness in his throat. His muscles ached from stillness, every joint stiff from hours locked in the same position, but he welcomed the ache. Pain reminded him he was alive, that the valley had not taken him as it had taken so many others. He thought of his comrades, miles away, unaware of the storm that had broken here. They would not know the valley's silence, nor the sharp ringing echo of every shot. They would hear only reports, numbers, maybe even commendations. But none of that captured this, the dust, the fear, the weight of a rifle in his hands. As life after life slipped through his crosshairs, numbers could never measure this. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the rocks. The sniper knew he had to move before darkness claimed the valley. Night was no ally to men caught in open ground. With practiced precision, he broke down his position. The rifle was cleared, the scope capped, the bipod folded. Each motion was deliberate, ritualistic, a soldier's prayer against complacency. Before leaving, he scanned the valley one final time. The bodies lay where they had fallen, silent witnesses to their own failure. He wondered if their comrades would come for them, if the valley would echo again with voices, or if they would be left here, nameless, faceless, swallowed by dust and time. Either way, the valley remembered. As he moved along the ridge, Sniper felt the desert's vastness press around him. He was a single figure against an ocean of stone, a ghost who had claimed a battlefield without ever being seen. That was the nature of his war. Invisible, uncelebrated, but decisive. And yet, beneath the discipline and the calm, he felt the question rising, the same one that always came after the silence. How many more? How many more valleys would he lie in, rifle steady, breath measured, watching men fall like wheat before the scythe? How many more times would his finger tighten on the trigger, sealing a fate before the target even knew he was chosen? He had no answer, only the silence. The sniper reached a rise at the far end of the ridge, pausing to look back. From here, the valley stretched wide beneath him, bathed in the dying light of the sun. It looked peaceful now, almost serene, as if the earth itself had conspired to hide the truth of what had happened within its walls. But he knew better. The valley would carry the story. Not in the rocks, not in the dust, but in the whispers. Of those who heard of it. Of the men who charged and fell. Of the shots that never missed. Of the sniper who waited, silent and patient, until the storm was his alone. That was the true weapon. Not the rifle, not the bullet, but the story. And stories spread faster than gunfire. As night began to fall, the sniper disappeared into the ridges, his figure blending into shadow. To those who would come after, he was no more than a ghost, a rumor carried on the wind. But the valley would not forget. The silence after the storm was not emptiness, it was memory. And in that silence, the sniper walked on.